So once again, I'm Mike Bedell, Dean of the College of Business and Technology at Northeastern Illinois University. Delighted to have you all here. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Kim Stevens, who is the founder of an organization called Inclusive Thinking. And Kim has 20 years in the diversity and inclusion space at IBM, among other things. Kim, at some point along her busy life, picked up a PhD, and her dissertation is in this area. And we have a great book we've been using as our one book per semester for the students at NEIU in the College of Business. And so there's a few copies of this around if anybody would like one. If not, we do have a barcode that can take you to find it. So I'm not going to say much more, but I'm going to say welcome Kim to the microphone and get out of the way. So welcome, Kim.
Right. Thank you all for being here, and welcome everyone who's joining us online. We are going to add up the slides here in just a minute, but thank you for coming. We'll see. Just a little bit of pause there. Take an extra break, an extra breath. Getting there. So as Mike said, a lot of what I'll be talking about is covered in my book, but I hope to bring you some of the highlights so that you'll be interested. And so we're going to start with just a little bit of a audience participation, and those of you who are online can participate as well. So I want to just look at this picture quickly and shout out a couple things you see, or just one. A what? A wolf. Yeah. A butterfly. Of course, praying mantis. Good. It's praying mantis is not one people see. What do you see? What do you see? You see a bird, a seagull? A bug. Yeah, there's a couple bugs in there, I think, right? Yeah. So all of those things that you said are there. And why do you think we're using this exercise as part of unconscious bias? Any ideas? People are still looking like, I don't see that praying mantis, right? Well, part of the reason I'm showing this is because as we talk today, we're going to learn that everyone in this room is perceiving the world differently. Right? Every one of you is taking in different data right now as we're sitting here, and you're seeing different things. And this little easy exercise is just to sort of show you that you're going to see different things. And we're all sitting in the same room, looking at the same screen, but we're seeing different things. And that's because our reality is built around our biases, what we see first, our experiences, all of these sorts of things. So hopefully that was a little fun for you. I've got to make sure I'm going forward. I'll have my trusty friend at the back advance one slide. Technical difficulties at a conference, but we're all right. So I'm going to talk about getting there. This next slide, so part of what I said before is we all have different pieces of data coming in. And actually, to be accurate, we have 11 million bits of data coming into our brain at all times. So it's coming in from what we hear, what we see, what we smell. I mean, think about that. Just take a minute and sort of think about how does my jacket feel on me? Or what do I smell? Or what do I hear? And those all are sort of going on in the background. So out of those 11 million pieces of data, how many do you think you can handle at a time? Just get some guesses. Not that many, not feeling it this morning, not on a Friday, right? Over here, you think guesses, just wild guesses. Throw some numbers. 100. Good. It's exactly, that's the point, right? So next slide. We'll see if I can do it. I did it. Yay. You can really handle about 40. So you're gathering those 40, and we're all out of those 11 million picking up different pieces, right? So what I'm saying with that is of your 40 may be very different from Jesse's 40, or your 40 may be very different from what Mike is. And again, that sort of brings back this idea that we're not all experiencing the world exactly the same. And then think about all those 10,999,960 that your brain is processing in the background. And a lot of that is unconsciously, right? What I talked about before, we're not paying attention necessarily, unless our shoes are hurting us, that our shoes are too tight, or this tie is cutting into me, or whatever it may be, right? We sort of discard those. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and why that happens. So today we're going to learn a little bit about unconscious bias. We don't have that much time together. If I had my in the sky pie, it would be 4 hours. But since we have a shorter time together, we're going to go through some of this and hopefully pique your interest enough to dig into it a little deeper. So we're going to learn about unconscious bias, explore how unconscious bias shows up and how it works. And then we're going to discover some ways to reduce unconscious bias, because I don't want to leave you hanging at the awareness piece. And then plan for your response and how you're going to lead, because we do have a lot of leaders here. And you know, as educators, you are leaders, right? You have so many people looking up to you. And so it's so important that you can get through this unconscious bias and lead. So what is bias? Let's start at the beginning. Thoughts? Assumptions. Preconceived notions. Good. Yes, love that. Preference. That's not a negative thing, is it? Preference. That's what I prefer. I prefer one thing over the other. We're going to keep that, put a pin in that one as we move to the next one. So what is unconscious bias then? You're not aware of it, right? It's a preference. It's an assumption that you're not necessarily aware of. It's not top of mind. It's not one of those 40 pieces that you're dealing with. So that's where we're focusing today. We're going to focus on unconscious bias, not intentional bias, but things that you don't know about. And we're going to talk about how to bring those up to the surface, or at least bring your consciousness up so that you can deal with those or see the triggers where these might occur. Where do these pieces happen? Why do they happen? So a lot of the basis for what I talk about is Daniel Kahneman, who's a brilliant economist that I love everything he's talked about. And so he talks about system 1 and system 2. And I think this is really the basis of everything we talk about today, and an important piece. So you have your system 1. This is the part that's going to automatically operate. It's in the background. It doesn't take a lot of your effort. And some research has said we spend 70 to 90% of our time there, which is very frightening if you think about 70 to 90% of the people on the road are in an unconscious mode, right? So that's system 1, and we're operating there a lot of the time, right? And system 2, it takes more attention. You really have to say, hey, this is a time when I want system 2. I need you to pay attention. I need you to join me here because I'm making some important decisions. But we have to call into it. Otherwise, system 1 will jump right in before system 2 is even really alert that system 1's already taken over. And system 2, honestly, if we were putting sort of a personification on it, system 2 is a little lazy, right? It's going to sit back and let system 1 do all the work. So I love these sort of breaking it down. It's very easy to understand. So again, sort of digging into this idea again, your system 1 is going to be the fast. It's unconscious. It's automatic. We use it for everyday decisions, but sometimes there can be errors. And this is when we have to really worry about that. So a good example would be if you're driving, right? I don't know if we can think back to the first time we were driving. My dad gave me a stick shift car and said, good luck with that. And so I had sort of a big learning curve, right? I was, the clutch, the brake, But after time, I can move all that information to system one and concentrate on other things. But for when I was learning, it was system two, right? Deep thinking, overthinking what I needed to do, but then I could move it to system one. So because system two is really slow, it's conscious, it's very effortful. It's for complex decisions, but it's a little bit more reliable because you're using your entire brain. You're not relying on assumptions or your preconceived notions. You're using the information that's in front of you. So this is what I would really want to talk about. System two is where we want to spend time when we're making important decisions, when we're talking to people, right? But instead of moving to system one. So we'll talk a little bit about that and learn again, how do I call into my system two? When do I call into my system two? So I'm not making errors in my judgment. So what's the impact? What is the impact of staying in system one? Well, it affects your decision-making ability. As I just talked about, if you're making all your decisions based on preconceived notions, on your prejudices, if we use that word, which again could be a preference, right? The same sort of thing, then you're not taking in new information. You're relying on past information. You're relying on past experiences with someone else. I've met someone like you, so this is how I expect you to act, right? Those sorts of things. It influences the way you perceive the world. That was our first exercise, right? Whatever we concentrated on, maybe it was the color. Maybe it was Danielle likes blue. So she saw blue first and that influenced what animal she saw, right? Or maybe someone else saw green first and that influenced because you like green. I don't know if you like green, maybe you do. So that's going to influence how we see the world and which of those data points, right? 11 million pieces of data, how our brain is sifting through those and saying, here are the 40 pieces that I want you to pay attention to, right? And the others can go in the background. And then changes the way we treat those around us. Again, if we're not conscious of what we're doing, we could treat someone based on a stereotype, based upon your interaction with someone else before, based upon past assumptions that you've learned, right? Your parents may have said something, oh, don't go around a person in a green hat. They're very dangerous, right? Because they've had that experience. And so those get passed down to us and become part of our assumptions, become part of our world. And then it obviously determines how inclusive and engaged you are. If you're making assumptions, you're not going to engage with the person in front of you. You're engaging with who you think that person is, right? You've got to get past that piece. And how inclusive you are. Because if we're really caught up in our own unconscious biases, we're leaving people out. And we'll talk about some of the biases that can lead to that. So this is a very daunting chart. We are not going to go through all 150. So you can just sigh of relief. But if you were to look them up right now, there'd be over 150 cognitive biases. And this is what we call these biases that are showing up in your brain. And there's so many of them. But we can really get them down to 4 categories. And this is the way I sort of like to think about them so that everybody that's in my workshop or session doesn't go out into the world and say, yep, that's confirmation bias. You know what they are, you know the categories. So then when they show up, you can recognize them. So the first one is, what should I remember? Right? We're always making those decisions. So you've got this data pouring in and you're making decisions about what you're going to keep and what you're not, what you're going to take notes on and what you're not. I'll be sitting in a meeting, and this would happen at IBM sometimes, and I would get back and look at my notes and I'd written down the end. I'm like, well, that's not helpful. Why didn't I write down some words that were going to trigger something, right? But I didn't write down the words. So apparently I, lost track of the conversation at some point, right? So that's important. We're sifting through things so we can remember. And there's so much information coming at us that we're making those decisions. Need to act fast. Any company I go into, especially when I was at IBM, I also work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. This one's a driving factor. You have to act fast. We don't have time for you to do all the research. Just give me what you have. Do what's in front of you, right? But if you don't have all the information and you're relying on past experiences or assumptions, again, you're not engaging with the information in front of you. You're making decisions based on past experiences, which can lead to errors. There's too much information. We definitely have this, right? We're bombarded in this age with information from the internet, our phone, all of this coming in. So it may be even more than 11 million bits of data at this point. And we're having to decide which can I pay attention to? Or for some of us, we're just shutting down, saying, oh, no, that's too much, I'm done. I'm going to keep it from this on, don't tell me anymore, right? So that's another way we can have unconscious bias. And then not enough meaning. We all know as humans that when we're presented with information, we fill in the gaps, right? If you don't give enough information, then people are going to try to make connections. They're going to go with past experiences. In my role in communications at IBM, I would stress this with our PR team. I was like, we have to get some information out because information is dribbling out. And I said, and people are going to start to make their own assumptions. This is where, if we were talking politics, conspiracy theories, they branch up in those gaps of information, right? So not enough meaning. Again, that's where our unconscious biases come in. We also have this lens, and each person in this room and online, you have a lens that you look through all the information, and you're filtering it through this lens. And it may be race, it may be LGBTQIA+, it may be disability, age, a number of things that aren't even represented on this. And they're influencing our biases. And so with our time a little short today, I'm going to talk about 5 different biases that are very common: implicit stereotype, similarity bias, in-group, out-group bias, confirmation bias, and especially important as we're talking about innovation is creativity bias. So those are the ones we're going to cover today out of the 150. So I would like to start with implicit stereotypes. And you'll notice I grouped them all together. Anytime we're going with a stereotype, we have created a model of what this stereotype is. And we are stuck with that model, right? We're not letting new information in. So details that don't line up with what we think the stereotype is, we're discarding those, right? If we think a particular person shows up like this and they have these religious beliefs and this is how they're going to act, then we're discarding specific details about that person to focus on a stereotype. So these filter out into all of the biases we're going to talk about. And that's a sort of overarching thing that we should remember. These are always present, right? And because we're not talking about intentional bias, we're talking about unconscious bias. I want you to keep that in mind, that they're always there influencing every decision we're making, even if we think they're not. So similarity bias is always a good one to start because everyone can identify with this, right? We like people that are similar to us. We seek out people that are similar to us. Why do we do that? We're comfortable, right? I know what to expect. You're in a suit, I'm in a suit. I know what to expect from that. You're in a suit. I know that. That makes me comfortable, right? I might be in red or pink, and I'm thinking, oh, that's great. She likes that color too. We have something in common, right? We're looking for those connections. That's, as humans, that's what we're doing, right? We are social, try to do that. So it's easier. Someone similar to us, they speak the same language that we do. It's going to be easier. We can be in system 1 a little bit more, right? If they speak a different language or their English isn't their first language, we might have to lean in a little bit more, right? That's more work for us. So we have to really, to get outside of similarity bias, we have to step out of our comfort zone. We have to put ourselves out there. We have to say, this is not a situation I'm in all the time. It's uncomfortable, but I'm going to learn here. So that's how we sort of overcome that one. And then I put at the bottom, if you find yourself And you can do this exercise at home. Think about your circle around you and see how close they are to you and see how diverse your circle is, right? And think about, what do I like about them? What do I dislike? And one of the things one of the executives said to me when they participate in a session, as he said, if I have 5 people that all think alike, look alike, and talk alike, why do I need 5? Why am I paying 5 people? I only need 1. I was like, well, that makes good financial sense, right? You don't need people just reinforcing what you already know. You don't need someone reinforcing what you already know. And we'll get to that when we talk about confirmation bias. So in-group, out-group bias shows up a lot every single place we go, right? It's maybe whether or not we're with sports teams. It may be race. It may be any of the other things we've talked about, disability or not disability. It could be, in my world, I'm in the rare disease world quite a bit. We map up by rare diseases or diseases that are in the same family, or, lysosomal storage diseases, or all these different things. We like to group. We like, again, to find that similarity and to have that sort of kinship. But this can show up. You can immediately see how in-group, out-group bias can keep you from being inclusive and being engaged, because you're making a decision that these folks don't fit and these do. And it shows up in the weirdest ways. I was telling the group yesterday, I went into one company and they had, the 4th floor, they never fill the coffee maker up. That was the 3rd floor saying that, right? They're a floor apart. They're the same company. They're in the same group. But we look for those little divides, and we'll say to each other, oh, she's a new person, so she doesn't know how we do it around here. I hear that at IBM all the time. You don't know the IBM way yet, Kim. Be like, what's the IBM way? Maybe I don't want to do it that way, right? But you have these biases that show up. And in-group, out-group is one we have to watch out for. Why are you setting yourself apart from someone? Why are you feeling the need to label someone and put them as an other? Right? That is a big piece. And you'll start to see this start to come in. I had when my son was first diagnosed with a rare disease, and I wasn't really comfortable with the label of special needs mom. I was traveling through an airport, and I believe this example is in my book. Danielle will keep me honest on that. And anyway, I'm sitting with my 2.5-year-old, and we're traveling for a clinical trial, and I'm in an airport, and he's sucking on a pacifier because he has Hunter syndrome, and they like that sort of stimulation. And she came up to me and she said, "Excuse me, are you a special needs mom?" Like, how do I answer that? Because I'm not really comfortable with that. And I have no idea what this lady's going to say to me. And I said, yes, I am. She goes, well, I'm a nurse. And I thought, oh, great. She's going to offer something. She's like, you special needs moms, I wouldn't trade places with you for anything in the world. Right. Not very encouraging, right? No, but I was shocked. It's like, why would you come across the room to do that, right? Making a point to do that. And she was othering me, right? She was very much othering me. You are over here as a special needs mom. I don't have to do that. And setting herself apart from me. And it made me feel terrible. I still, that was 10 years ago. It's still with me. And thank God she retired from nursing. Is all I can say. I was like, because that was not a good profession for you, right? So this can be detrimental, really can. So I'm going to move along in the sense of time. Confirmation bias. This is, again, one we do every single day. And once I've sort of brought it here, you're going to be like, oh, that's what Kim was talking about with confirmation bias. We're only gathering information that confirms what we already believe, right? We see this dramatically in our news stories. And we've seen it with the polarizing of parties, right? Where I'm not going to listen to you because you're different than me and we have different beliefs. So I'm just going to shut down, right? Because I can't take in information that contradicts what I already believe, right? And this is when conversation shuts down, right? If I refuse to listen to you because you might say something contrary to what I hold dear, then that's threatening, right? So I'm just not going to risk talking to you. And we reinforce this. We'll listen to certain news stories. We'll read certain news articles. We'll talk to people who are similar to us so that we can go, yeah, that's right. I believe that too, right? Because we don't want to go, well, I don't know. I don't agree with you. It's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable. So let's just not do it. So we constantly are doing that, and we're discarding information that may alter what we would believe. So how do we deal with that curiosity? I don't understand why you believe what you did, but tell me why. I still don't agree with you. And we'll talk about listening generously and how you do that in just a minute. And then the last one, which is really important in innovation, is creativity bias. And this is, we don't want anything different. We're going to keep with a status quo. We're not going to take a risk. Because being creative you have to take a risk, right? You're doing something for the first time. You're doing something that's not been tested. And guarantee in any sort of technical company that says, we want you to be creative, but only under these rules, these parameters, and oh, you've got to in 6 months to prove it works, or we'll abandon the program, right? We see this, but they're telling us to be creative. I went to a company that was a technology company, and I was presenting to their leadership before I presented to the employees because it was sort of a train the trainer thing. They wanted to take my program throughout the company. And I talked about creativity bias, and they were like, oh no, we can't talk about creativity bias here. It's like, aren't you a young company? Yeah, I mean, we've only been around for 3 or 4 years, but we don't want to talk to the employees about creativity because it'll just frustrate them when they can't be creative. I was like, and I was like, and I'm here because of why, right? It's like, you're not getting the whole point, right? So, but that happens. Oh, we don't do it like here. We don't do that here. No, that's risky. That sounds a little risky, right? How do you overcome that? I would always say, well, can I run a pilot? Because they'd be like, oh yeah, you can do a pilot. Can we do a trial on this? These are the sorts of things you have to overcome. And those are unconscious biases, right? I'm comfortable with this, so I'm not going to take a risk. And so you have to understand that to be able to overcome it. So as I said, I'm not leaving you hanging and walking away and say, good luck with that. Here are some of the things that research has shown that is effective. It's not going to eliminate all unconscious bias, but as I talk in my book, this is the part where we're trying to unfreeze. We've done the awareness to unfreeze the behavior. Now we're going to change the behavior by giving you some tips. And then we'll talk at the end about how to refreeze that behavior. So what can you do? That's sort of a rhetorical question, so I'll answer it. Slowing down. If nothing else, when you walk out of this room, I hope you think, Kim said something about slowing down, right? You have to give yourself time for system 2, because remember, it's lazy. It's sitting back there going, well, I'm not sure if I should jump in right here. System 1 looks like it has it under control. So you got to give yourself time, slow down. Don't go with that first answer that pops out or that first reaction. Think about that. Being aware of your own bias is important as well. So take time to reduce distractions. I asked this yesterday, but how many people think they're good multitaskers? That wasn't the answer I got from the students yesterday, I'll tell you. They're all like, yeah, maybe I'm the best, right? Yeah, and no, right. No one can multitask, and as I said yesterday, you're starting, you're stopping, you're starting, you're stopping, you're starting, you're stopping, right? You cannot multitask effectively. You can do it ineffectively, sure. So putting away distractions. And even when I shared with them yesterday, even having your phone over here, I'm not going to look at it. Research says that doesn't help. You can turn it over. Research says that's better. Putting it in my purse or my backpack, that's better still. but the best is not even to have it in the room, right? That's where the research has shown that you're going to pay attention. I once had a meeting with a VP and at IBM in marketing, and she was on her phone, texting, looking at her screen, all while trying to have a meeting with me. And out of that, what I heard was, Kim, I need that slide with the ship. And I left there going, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? I'm walking around the office going, do you know what Sandy means about a slide with a ship? You know, and it took me 45 minutes to find someone. Oh, maybe she means that one that had that graphic that was like a ship. Completely ineffective, right? Completely waste of my time because she was not giving me giving attention to me, right? Don't make assumptions. Love that one from you. That was the first one we said, don't make assumptions. That's our system one. Assumptions are system one thinking. We're assuming because of past experience, past thoughts, that this is how this is going to play out. That's why I named the book Assume Nothing, right? I'm being very blatant. Don't assume, right? When you need to, ask, get more information, but not based on just past what has happened. And then ask for other opinions and perspectives. You know, if one of the things the exercise shows you at the beginning was people are experiencing things differently. They're taking in different information. So it's great to talk to someone and say, hey, did you catch what Joan said about the blackboard, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh no, I didn't hear that. Did she even say that? Or I don't know what she meant by that. Would you know? Oh, I didn't even hear that. Or I didn't think that at all. Or I didn't think she was upset. You thought she was upset? There's a whole bunch of misunderstandings that happen because your perspective, your assumptions. So asking other people, hey, what did you get out of that meeting? Or what vibe did you get? Maybe if we're trying to be really hip, did you get from that? And asking that. And it's really helpful if you're doing interviews to think about this, bringing some other perspectives in, having different people in a panel interviewing. So this is the one too, we're going to talk about listening generously. This is another one. If you walk out with not much else, this is important. We all think we're tremendously good listeners. As we talk through this, you'll go, oh, wow. Yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that. Right? Listening generously. We already talked about putting away distractions. I have to do this every time. I have to remind myself when my 14-year-old son comes up to me and he wants to talk about a game he plays online called Ark. And he's like, Mom, I built this new world and da, 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 da. And I'm like, and that's what I hear, da, 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 da. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm checking out. Let me get back into that, right? Because I'm not hearing anything. One of workshop participants said she hears, well, you know, hey, Cheryl, blah, 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 because she's already skipped to the end, right? That's unconscious bias. That's you. I know what this person's going to say. I'm assuming I know what this person is saying. So I'm going to jump to the end because I don't have time for all this other stuff. Listen without thinking about what you're going to say next. This is the hardest one for me because my brain is popping up all these sort of arguments in my head and what I'm going to say next. And you're talking, but I'm thinking about my answer or thinking about you're so wrong. I can't even believe we're talking about this. And now it's my turn so that I can just tear you apart with my argument, right? These sorts of things. We're always thinking about that. Or we're worried about being embarrassed because we're not ready with an answer, right? It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to say, yeah, that's really, I'd like to think about that. It's okay to say, I'd like to think about that and come back to you on that, rather than just throwing something out there. It's okay to do that. And listen without a negative attention. This is, again, part of that sort of arguing. Thinking about the person has a positive intent. Because we come in with our own attitude, our own perception of what this person is like. Like how many times have you said, this person is really difficult to work with? So you're coming into, because you heard that, right? So your assumption is now, this is a difficult person. I'm going to have to interact with them. They're going to be difficult. This is going to be hard. And you've set yourself up and you haven't even met the person. Listen without dismissing. This is another one of those skip to the bottom and blah, 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 blah. I've already dismissed you because I know your political leaning. I'm not going to listen to you. I've shut down. Can you just walk away from me? I'm dismissing you, right? Whatever you say, it doesn't matter what you say, I'm dismissing it. We do this, right? This is why we can't have conversations. This is why we don't have a middle ground. Listen without arguing. This is mostly in your head. Maybe perhaps you're saying it verbally, but we do this, right? And you have, if you've ever heard someone tell you, let me finish, this is you right here. You're arguing before they're done, right? Acknowledge the other person's experience. I always try to do this, even if someone tells me something that I think is, in my opinion, off the wall. I'm like, thank you for sharing your perspective. And it's not dismissive. I really am appreciative because I would never have known this perspective until I talked to the person. And I talk in my book about transformational conversation and having these conversations with people that you would never encounter or that have very distinct views from you, and being curious and talking to them and say, will you share with me your perspective? It's really pretty cool. And you widen your circle and you learn, and you maybe even learn the argument of why they believe what they do. And there's some understanding there, even if you don't disagree with them. And then honor their perspective. This kind of goes right hand in hand of acknowledging. Honor their perspective. It's theirs. You don't know what's influenced that. Again, we're all perceiving the world different. Say, I appreciate that. You can say, I don't agree with that, but I appreciate you sharing that with me. It widened my view about blah, blah, blah. I had a discussion with a student yesterday about the prison system. And she had a very different view coming in as a white female, young white female than I did because of my research on the prison system and the incarceration level of minorities. And so I shared that with her. And to her credit, she listened. It was completely against what she had said. And so she could have said, I don't know, Kim has no idea what she's talking about, but she listened. And she said, you know, you've broadened what I'm going to think about when I write this. That's all I can ask for, right? That's great. So, and then I put this one in specifically for this group, thinking about creating inclusive meetings. And this could be a staff meeting. It could be a student group. I did this when I was teaching the MBA program. I used a lot of these tools so that my students were all included, because it's easy when you have a class of 30, 20 to let the dominant folks take over because they're eager. They're like, no, 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 me. You know, they're ready. And then you have some students in the back that might be, they have really great ideas, but they're just not, you know, going to step right up. And part of this too, as I've found in my classes, that sometimes, you know, I don't like the label introvert and extrovert, but some folks need a little bit more time to process. So I'd always say, hey, let's take a little time. We're going to take, 3 or 4 minutes. I want everybody to think about that. No one share right now. And then we'll talk about it. And I found class participation went up tremendously because those were those people that needed a little bit more time, a little bit of quiet time. I know I do. So setting the agenda ahead of time so people know what they're coming into. You all do this if you're professors with your syllabus. They don't come in there thinking, oh, I wonder what they're going to talk about today, right? We don't do that at staff meetings. Let's send out an agenda. Let them know what's going to, so they're prepared right ahead of time. One of the other things I've learned from this as well is sending out the agenda ahead of time is great for people who may have visual issues, right? They can't necessarily see something up on the screen. So if you've sent it to them, they can put it on their screen, magnify it, use those sorts of tools that they already have on their computer. How did I find that out? Someone told me, right? That's not my experience, but I learned. And now I always think about that. I need to send it ahead of time so that they understand, right? Or they need to have their screen reader read it for them, or they want to be prepared, all these sorts of things. So that's why I say, give some heads up about what you're going to talk about. What I just said before, give people time to gather their thoughts. Hey, everybody just take 3 or 4 minutes, jot down some ideas, and then we're going to talk about this. Make sure everyone has a chance to speak. This was another hard one. When I was in a physical classroom and when I do my workshops, I usually will pass out a card. You've probably done some of these tricks before too. I pass out just a plain card to everybody, put it in front of them. Like, you don't have to look at it, it's for me. And then as they speak, I pick up the card and then I can look around and say, oh, James, you haven't spoken today. Is there something you'd like to share? Or if I know that they're a little bit more reticent to speak, I might catch them during a break and say, hey, what were you thinking about this idea? And they're like, well, I was thinking that, and they always have something, right? It's there. They just don't want to speak up. And I said, would you mind sharing that with the class when we start back up? If they say, no, I don't want to do it, I'm like, would you mind if I share your example? And then they usually jump in, right? You just got to find those ways to bring those people in. And I'm sure we have lots of experts and you could add to that. But really making that, it has to be intentional, right? Otherwise, you're just going to walk in and you're going to have the same people sort of speaking up every time. Again, this part is to pay attention to who speaks and who doesn't. I love being able to, during a break, go up to people that are not engaged and say, hey, what are you thinking? Hold meetings in person or video when possible. This is great to be able to see those signals. I can tell when I look out in the audience if someone's kind of sitting there, and especially if they're sleeping, they're not engaged, right? Or if they're in physical class, I can walk over and stand closer to them. Make sure that I'm engaging them, right? It's really hard to see if it's just a call. When I do training with some of my government clients, they tell them to turn off their screens because the bandwidth apparently in the government buildings isn't that great. And then I'm looking at dots. So I've gotten really good at interacting with just dots but it's not the same, right? I really like to see someone's face. Are you interested? Are you not interested? Have I lost you? Have I turned you off with the content? Right? Is there something that I'm saying? You can see when people disagree. I can't hide my facial expressions at all. So I'm just open with that. And then one of the things that I like to do, and I like to leave this with you, so you can use this with your students, is thinking about, when do I say something? Maybe that I'm sensing some unconscious bias. Now you're all aware of it. You go out into your class, you go out into the world, and you're sensing that there's some unconscious bias here, but you don't know what to do, right? So the risk model is something you really can walk through, and it's featured in the book as well. What are the risks to me if I respond? And then what are the risks to me if I don't respond? And so part of this is really weighing, okay, does this person have authority over me? If I go to them, will they receive this information well, or is it going to be detrimental to my career? Is this the right person that I need to go to? Is this an HR matter? I always say that when I'm at a company. And what are the risks if I don't respond? Will they do this again? Is this a pattern? Will this keep bothering me? Is this something that will eat at me and say, I wish I would have said this, or I should have said this, or I should have stood up for this person. I should have been a better ally. And then that's part of it. Is it important to me to respond? Again, if it's a pattern, if you're seeing it over and over again, you're seeing someone being negatively impacted by someone else's unconscious bias, that's when you might say, this is a risk I'm going to take. This is something I'm going to say something. And then you figure out who you're going to say it to. And then if you do talk to the person, again, thinking sort of a positive attention, you can say, this is what I heard, and this is the way I interpreted it. And give the person time. They may have no idea that they said that. Again, or it's something they've been doing for so long that they don't even realize that it's not something that they should be saying. I do this a lot with, I live in the South, of course, and someone will say something that has now become a slur or something that's not appropriate. And I'll say, hey, we don't say that anymore. Now, and I'm in the special needs world, so the language is constantly evolving. It's person first. It's like, you don't say, but then if you have someone who's blind, they like to be referred to as blind, not a person who is blind. So these are the little sort of things you find out by talking to people, right? And finding out what is, if it's in context. Of course, if it's not in context, there's no reason for you to do that. But certainly if you see the behavior and you can correct it and it's a friend and say, hey, we don't use that word anymore. It's a little offensive. And they may be defensive and say, well, I don't reason all this politically correct, and say, it's not about being politically correct. It's about being kind. It's all about being kind and having empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And if it doesn't go well, which it might not, keep calm and say, well, I just wanted to let you know. And maybe, a month from later, they'll come up to you and say, thanks for saying that. I thought about it. I had some time to cool down, and I'm really going to make an effort not to do that again. So one of the pieces I do want to come away from this as we're getting into time is making a plan. So one of the pieces, the research shows that if you make a plan and you put it sort of in a, if this happens, then do this, and really use that wording, you're more likely to follow it. So if I hear this word used in a meeting, then I will speak up and say something. Because as I illustrated with that example of the woman at the airport, I was shocked. I didn't say anything witty. I didn't say anything good come back. Of course, they all came to me right after, right? As soon as she said it and she'd walked away, I was like, I should have said this and I should have said that. But I didn't, because it was shocking to me. And sometimes it is shocking. But you say, if this happens, here's how I want to react. Here's what I want to be as a person. Here's how I want to be a good ally. So I want you to think about, what are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to continue to do? And this is for you to help you sort of synthesize the material we've had today and think about what you're going to do coming out of this session. And then, of course, it wouldn't be complete if an author didn't plug their book. So there's more information like this. I very intentionally made it short so that people could read it in 1 to 2 settings, because I want it to be accessible. I also tried to keep it where anyone who picked it up, it's a good start, right? I hope they seek more information. I hope they read my next book, which I haven't written yet. But this is a good start. It's a good place to start. It's a good place for students to start, to think about these things. It's not overwhelming. It's not the Daniel Kahneman book, which is this big, if you've read that one. So that was my real intention. So do you have questions? Ben's ready.
A quick question about your book. That image, is there multiple things to see in that image?
Oh, yeah. Good job. Yeah, it is. You see, well, let me go back. Yes, that was really intentional as well. Yeah, because it was this idea of people may see different things. What comes out to you first? Is it the butterfly transforming, or is it the two people having a conversation? So, yeah. I love that. I just, when I went to the book company and I said, here's my vision of what it would be. And they told me, you're going to have some negotiation back and forth. And they said, what colors do you like? And I'm a Tennessee Vol, so orange is number one. I bleed orange and have been conditioned since birth. And they came back with that, and I said, that's it, right? You're emerging, we're changing. Unconscious bias isn't something you're not going to arrive. It's always going to be a journey. You're always evolving. You're always learning. I do that every day. I'm still curious. I'm still asking people, share your perspective with me. So thank you for asking. Anyone else? Sure. Got some over there and
So, thank you for the presentation. And I don't even know how to make the question, so I'll try. But sometimes, both as a leader or as a participant of a conversation, you find, it's easier to find our own unconscious biases, but you run into somebody else's unconscious biases. And I don't know if this was always the same or it's the result of the last 4 or 5 years. Not everybody reacts the way you reacted when you find somebody else's unconscious bias. And nobody assumes that for some people that are really unconscious, not everybody has a directly adopted bias for a particular reason. Some people do, some people don't. And when you're working on a team and you're trying to create a teamwork environment, how do you manage that?
yeah, you get a lot of team things in between and everybody has their own perspective. And really, I think that's when a leader can step in and say, okay, thank you for your opinion to someone. And I've done this. I'll hold a workshop and there are very different opinions within the group. And I'll give you an example. I had one woman, they were sitting at a table together and this one woman said, well, I appreciate this session, Kim, but I don't really see color. Like, okay. And I could see this woman over here wiggling in her seat, I said, well, it looks like you have a different opinion. Would you like to share that? And she aired her opinion and we heard this one. And the lady that had spoken about not seeing color said, oh, I hadn't thought about the idea that I was not seeing you as a full person and I was disregarding this information. I didn't understand it was important to you. And that was brilliant. I mean, that was like a facilitator's dream right there, right? I mean, you're just like, that just happened in front of me. That was amazing, right? That's not going to happen all the time. And that's when you're really going to look at your risk model. Is this a group that's going to have to work together? Then you're going to have to do some serious work, talking with some people offline and saying, okay, I appreciate that. But when we're in a group, we're going to get to a consensus. And it may be at a point where you're saying to everyone, okay, I appreciate all your opinions, but it looks like we're going to go with this idea, or we're going to vote, or we're going to come together, or whatever it may be. Or at the end of the day, I'm shutting this door and we all have to agree that we're going to disagree and move forward, right? So sometimes it's not going to work, right? You're going to have people that are receptive and then you have people that are just going to cross their arms and say, nope, not doing it, right? We have one more question here, I think.
Well, I think you actually just got to the issue, which is, what do you do with folks who, when this topic comes up, just shut down?
Yeah.
And, I'm sure you walk into rooms where the word unconscious bias is, they're done.
They're done before I'm in the room.
Yeah. So how do you handle situations where it's, you just gave an example where it worked well, but how do you, what tactics do you use to cut through really challenging situations where people have just, in this case, it's about unconscious bias, but in other cases, it's, something else comes up and they're done at that point. What tactics do you use?
Well, you can imagine that I have walked into rooms where I was not, first of all, you don't call it diversity training. That'll just shut your audience down right away, right? I don't usually call it unconscious bias training. I'll call it leading consciously, right? I'm putting a positive. I'm trying to help you. You take it or you leave it. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm not trying to say that you're wrong. And I cover some of my research in that area that says, shaming someone doesn't work. That's going to shut them down right away, right? So I'm very aware of my audience. I've walked into rooms and it was all white males and they've been sitting there like this because they've been attacked in the past. That's not my job. If I'm coming in to preach to them, and I don't care if they shut down, right? But if I'm coming in to actually make change, then I've got to understand my audience, meet them where they are, and try to bring them up to where I need them to be. And so that's really what I end up doing. You know, what do you think about this topic? What is your past experience with this topic? And they come a little bit. I mean, I went into, and I talk about this too in my book, I went into a utility company. So these are guys that are out there reading meters and doing all this sort of stuff. And I had my own preconceived notions of this group. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my hardest audience ever. And, you know, and then they're looking at me coming in. I was like, well, I'm not going to wear a suit because I've got to, you know, establish that I am okay. I'm not that diversity lady. And it turned out that, you know, they were working in an area where my grandparents were from, and I used similarity bias to my advantage, right? I said, I'm one of you. I grew up the same way you did, and I'm here to help you work better with your employees, understand them, understand their perspectives. I'm not here to criticize. I'm not even here to say you're wrong. I just want you to meet me a little bit. And they all did. I mean, I had emails the next day saying, wow, I hadn't really thought about it. We're still talking about it. And I was like, that's great. You know, that's a win. Even if they're just talking about it, I got a conversation started. So that's really cool. So yeah, meeting them where they are. I think we're out of time. Is that right, Ben? Nope.
You
Go
have
ahead.
time for one more?
Oh, sure. I have all the time in the world.
I just had a follow-up question. How do you help someone who perceives being in the out group be part of the in group?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? And I talk a lot more about it. I think I have a whole chapter devoted to, you know, what do you do, and when do you keep fighting, and when do you just walk away, because there's not going to be change. You know, how do you help them? Be a good ally, right? Talk with them. Say, what can I do to support you? I see you were shut down in that meeting. I don't like that. Is there something I can do to help you? You know, during the Obama administration, they had the women had a little group. You've read about this, right? And they would support each other. So if they went into a meeting and then someone said something and they got shut down or they got talked over, they're like, someone else would say, you know, I'd really like to hear what Tamika has to say. And amplify, right? Amplify. That was a really good idea. I think we should talk more about that, right? That's how you can support. And you can do that as men, women, you know, non-binary, whatever it may be. You can help those people around you. And so what we did today, you know, was thinking, now you're going to be more aware. You're going to see that and you'll say, wow, I think that was a little unconscious bias here. What can I do? And you can come and amplify and be a good ally. So I hope you all will be. All right. Thank you very much.
I believe the next session is next door. Lunch is imminent in terms of coming in from the caterer. So if you guys want to take a brief minute and hit a restroom or whatever, we'll re-adjourn at the round tables next door. Oh yeah, the restrooms, probably the easiest way is to go out the doors over in this room, go straight across. So.